It was a Thursday night, one of those nights where everything seemed normal. I came home from work, tired but relieved to be done with the day. The house was quiet, Chloe was in the shower, her phone lying on the kitchen counter. I walked past it at first, but something made me stop and turn back. Chloe never left her phone out like that. She guarded it like a hawk. A cold feeling crept up my spine as I stared at it. I told myself I shouldn't look, that I was being paranoid. But the gnawing suspicion had been building for weeks now. Ever since she started coming home late after her so-called music lessons. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone, my hands shaking slightly. I unlocked it easily. She had given me the passcode months ago, back when I still trusted her without question. My heart sank the moment I saw the text messages. The name at the top of the screen read, Mark, her music teacher. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the endless stream of texts. They weren't about music. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. Miss you already. Can't stop thinking about you. I read those words over and over, each one a dagger in my chest. My hands were numb, and my breath was shallow. I wanted to scream and throw the phone across the room, but I just stood there, frozen, staring at the evidence of her betrayal. Chloe had been cheating on me, with some pathetic music teacher, no less. I could hear the shower still running upstairs, the sound of water pounding against the tiles. Completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. At that moment, I knew things would never be the same. But I wasn't going to confront her right away. No, that would be too easy. She didn't deserve an argument or tears or a fight. She deserved to pay. My thoughts began to race, a plan slowly forming in the back of my mind. Chloe didn't know I had found out, and I was going to use that to my advantage. If she wanted to throw everything we had away for this guy, I was going to make sure she and her precious Mark would regret it. Not just regret it, I was going to ruin them both. I glanced up at the staircase, hearing the water stop. The shower was over, but I was just getting started. I put her phone back exactly where I found it, my heartbeat finally slowing down as anger replaced the shock. The next few days were a blur. I acted as if nothing had changed. I kissed her goodnight, and made her coffee in the morning, all while carefully planning my next move. I had installed a small, hidden camera in the bedroom, one that would record everything. If Chloe was stupid enough to bring him here, I would catch them both. And they did. Just 3 days later, while I was at work, my phone buzzed with an alert from the camera. There they were, Mark and Chloe, together in our bed. I watched the footage once, just to make sure I had enough. My hands didn't shake this time. I felt nothing, just cold determination. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about making sure they paid for what they did. Mark had no idea what was coming. Neither did Chloe. The first time I saw the footage, I barely blinked. It was surreal, watching the woman I had loved for years with another man, right there in our bed. But instead of the heartbreak I thought I'd feel, there was only a chilling sense of calm. They didn't know it yet, but I had the upper hand. And that's all that mattered now. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, carefully, methodically. Every time Chloe left for one of her lessons, I made sure the camera was running. Each visit was the same. Mark would show up at the house, they'd spend an hour or two together, and then he'd leave, smug and satisfied. And each time, I saved the footage, archiving every disgusting minute of their affair. It wasn't just the videos. I started taking screenshots of their messages, too. I accessed her social media accounts and found private chats they'd been having. They thought they were being clever, using coded words, but it wasn't hard to piece together what was really going on. I documented everything, building a case that would leave no room for doubt. But simply confronting them wasn't enough. What would that achieve? A fight, some shouting, and maybe a broken marriage. No, I wanted more. I wanted to dismantle them, piece by piece. Mark was my real target. He wasn't just some random fling, he was a respected music teacher, with students, colleagues, and a reputation. Chloe had always talked about how talented and admired he was. Well, we'd see how quickly that admiration would fade once his dirty little secret got out. I did my research. Mark taught at a well-known music academy in town, and he was involved in the local music scene. He had built a career on being the charming, reliable teacher everyone trusted with their kids. It was almost too perfect. I wasn't just going to expose the affair, I was going to make sure his name became poison. The first step was subtle. I created an anonymous email account and began reaching out to some key people, members of the academy's board, a few of his colleagues, and parents of his students. The message was simple, a warning about inappropriate behavior involving a certain music teacher. I didn't include the evidence just yet. This was just to plant the seed of doubt, to make them start watching him a little more closely. While that brewed, I started preparing the bombshell. I compiled all the videos, messages, and screenshots into a neat little package, making sure it was clear, undeniable proof of Mark's affair with one of his student spouses. It wasn't just about the affair, though. I framed it as a breach of trust, something much worse than just infidelity. He had crossed a line as a professional, betraying not just me, but the entire community that had trusted him. Chloe, of course, was still in the dark. She carried on as if nothing was wrong, completely unaware that I was quietly dismantling her lover's life behind her back. Every time she kissed me goodbye before one of her lessons, I could barely suppress the smirk that threatened to creep across my face. The moment I had everything in place, I sent the package to every important figure in the local music community, anonymously, of course. I knew it wouldn't take long for the news to spread. People love a scandal, especially when it involves someone they thought they knew. It didn't take long for the storm to hit. Within a week, Mark was under investigation. The academy was swift to react, suspending him indefinitely while they looked into the matter. Rumors started swirling in the community. Parents were pulling their kids from his classes, and his colleagues began distancing themselves from him. His name was becoming toxic. Chloe, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware of the chaos swirling around Mark. She kept going to her lessons, still smiling, still pretending that everything was fine. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth caught up with her, too. I didn't confront her, not yet. I wanted her to see what was happening first, to feel the weight of the consequences crashing down around her. The night the academy officially cut ties with Mark, Chloe came home later than usual. She looked exhausted, but not in the way I was used to. There was something different in her eyes, a nervous energy, like she knew something was wrong but couldn't quite figure out what. She sat down at the kitchen table, barely able to meet my eyes. "Something's been going on with Mark," she said, her voice shaky. "He's been suspended. There's some rumor going around about him." I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The trap had been set, and she was about to walk right into it. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face neutral. "Really? What kind of rumor?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "Something about inappropriate behavior. I don't know all the details, but it's bad. He might lose his job." I nodded slowly, pretending to think. "That's unfortunate." Inside, though, I was smiling. This was just the beginning. The night Chloe told me about Mark's suspension, I could see the panic flickering behind her eyes. She tried to play it off as concern for a friend, but I knew better. The web I'd spun was tightening around them, and she could sense it, even if she didn't yet know the full extent of the disaster heading her way. For the next few days, I watched as Chloe's mood shifted. She became distant, her usual calm and confident demeanor unraveling bit by bit. The late-night calls to Mark increased. I'd hear her whispering in the living room, thinking I was asleep. But I knew every word. She was trying to comfort him, reassure him that everything would be okay. But it wasn't. By the end of the week, the storm hit its peak. Mark's name was plastered across local forums and social media, his reputation in freefall. People were talking about the videos, the messages. The scandal was out in the open. The academy released an official statement cutting ties with him, stating that his actions were inconsistent with the values and integrity expected from their faculty. Parents were furious. Students left his classes en masse. And the whispers of legal action weren't far behind. Chloe couldn't avoid the fallout much longer. One night, she came home in tears, her face pale and her hands shaking. She sat down at the kitchen table, barely able to look at me. "I don't know what's happening," she choked out. "It's like his whole life is falling apart. Someone's out to get him." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. "What do you mean?" She rubbed her hands over her face, struggling to find the words. "There are these videos. Someone sent them to his students, to the academy. They're saying he had an affair with a married woman. That he's been unprofessional. It's all over the internet. People are turning on him." I could see her trying to keep it together, but the cracks were showing. She hadn't been caught yet, but she was close. I didn't say anything, just watched as she unraveled in front of me. She finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Oliver, you don't think it's true, do you? Mark would never do something like this. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence hang in the air between us. Did she really think I was that blind? That stupid? I could have exploded right then and there, throwing everything I knew in her face. But no, that wasn't part of the plan. Not yet. I forced a sympathetic smile. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. These things have a way of blowing over. Chloe nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She was scared, and she should be. The noose was tightening, and she had no idea how close it was to snapping. Over the next few days, I could see her spiraling. The affair that had once been thrilling for her had turned into a nightmare. Mark was becoming more desperate. He called her constantly, asking for advice and begging for support. Chloe was caught between trying to help him and protecting herself from getting dragged down with him. I knew it was time to push her over the edge. One evening, when she was out, I went through her phone again. I found a message thread between her and Mark, a frantic exchange about the videos, the fallout, and how they were going to handle it. It was all there in black and white, evidence of the affair, of the lies, of everything they had tried to hide. I took screenshots of the conversation and sent them to Chloe from an anonymous number. The second she came through the door that night, I knew she had seen them. Her face was pale, and she looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Without saying a word, she walked into the kitchen, holding her phone tightly in her hand. I waited, giving her the chance to speak first, but she just stood there, staring at the floor. Finally, she whispered, "Someone knows." I raised an eyebrow. "Knows what?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "The affair. Someone sent me screenshots of my messages with Mark. They know, Oliver. They know everything." I watched her, calm on the outside, but inside I was smiling. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The final crack in her facade. The moment when she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. I stood up slowly, walking over to her. "Who sent them?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "It was an anonymous number. I thought it was just rumors, but Oliver, it's all true. Everything they're saying about Mark and me, it's all true." I stared at her, letting the words sink in. She was confessing now, but not because she wanted to. She was confessing because she had no other option. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I wanted her to squirm, to feel the full weight of what she had done. And then, finally, I spoke. "I know," I said quietly. Chloe froze, her tear-streaked face turning toward me in shock. What do you mean, you know?" I looked her in the eyes, my voice steady and calm. "I've known for weeks. About you and Mark. About the affair. About everything." She gasped, stumbling back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. You knew? All this time?" I nodded, taking a step closer. "I've seen the messages. I've seen the videos. I know what you've been doing behind my back." Chloe's face crumpled as the realization hit her. "Oliver, I'm sorry. I didn't mean," but I cut her off. "Sorry doesn't fix this. You made your choice, Chloe. Now you have to live with it." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, broken, while the weight of her own betrayal crashed down around her. The revenge I had been waiting for was complete. The night Chloe confessed was the turning point. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. She had admitted everything, but not because of remorse, it was out of fear. And that fear would only grow as the consequences of her actions became clearer. For the next few days, Chloe was a ghost in our house. She barely spoke and barely ate, and when she wasn't at work, she was glued to her phone, constantly messaging Mark. He was in full panic mode now. The academy had officially fired him, and the local music community was cutting ties faster than he could manage. I heard Chloe crying in the bedroom late at night, but I didn't care. The empathy I once had for her was long gone. One morning, she broke the silence. Sitting at the breakfast table, her eyes red and swollen, she finally spoke up. "Oliver, I think we should talk about what happens next." I didn't look up from my coffee. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "About us. About our marriage. I know I've done something unforgivable, but maybe we can still fix this. Maybe we can get through it." I almost laughed. Fix this? After what she'd done? The idea was absurd, but I kept my composure. I wanted to see how far she would go to salvage what was left. "How exactly do you think we could fix this?" I asked, setting my mug down and finally meeting her gaze. Chloe wiped a tear from her cheek. "I could cut things off with Mark completely. We could go to counseling. and work through this. I'll do anything, Oliver. I made a mistake, but I love you. I don't want to lose you. Her words were desperate, but they didn't move me. Maybe a part of me had once wanted to hear this, for her to beg for forgiveness, to fight for our marriage. But that part of me was long gone. I'm not sure love is enough anymore, Chloe, I said coldly. You didn't just make a mistake. You lied. For months. You destroyed the trust between us. Counseling won't fix that. She sobbed openly now, but I didn't feel any sympathy. She had already broken me. All I wanted was to see her suffer the way I had. And she was. Please, Oliver, she whispered, I'll do anything. Just, don't leave me. I watched her for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. You didn't think about that when you were sneaking around with Mark. You didn't think about us then. Why should I care now? Chloe fell silent, her tears streaming down her face as she realized the gravity of the situation. I wasn't going to forgive her. There was no coming back from this. I'll stay, I said finally, watching the flicker of hope in her eyes. But not because I want to fix things. I'll stay because I want you to feel exactly what I felt, the betrayal, the loneliness, the shame. I want you to live with the consequences of your actions, day in and day out. Her face twisted in confusion and horror as she tried to understand what I was saying. What do you mean? I continued, my voice cold as ice. We're not getting a divorce. Not yet. I want you to live in this house with me, knowing that I'll never forgive you. I want you to wake up every day with the weight of what you did hanging over your head. That's your punishment. Chloe gasped, shaking her head in disbelief. That's not fair. Fair? I cut her off, my voice rising for the first time. You think any of this is fair? Do you think it was fair when I found out you were sleeping with another man in our bed? This is what you deserve. Chloe. And you're going to live with it. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. But I was done. I stood up, leaving her there to drown in her guilt. I had made my decision. She would pay for what she'd done, slowly, painfully. And I would watch it all happen. As Chloe sank deeper into despair, Mark's life continued to fall apart. Every day, I heard less and less from her about him, but I kept tabs. The local music forums and social media were alive with gossip. Parents were outraged, students were horrified, and former colleagues wanted nothing to do with him. He tried to defend himself at first, making vague statements about misunderstandings, but the evidence I had released was too damning. No one believed him. His career was over. Then, one evening, Mark tried something new. He called me. I had been expecting it, honestly. I knew he'd eventually reach out, desperate to understand who had orchestrated his downfall. But when I saw his name flash on my phone, I didn't feel anger. I felt satisfaction. I answered, my voice calm. Mark. He was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback that I had picked up. Oliver. I didn't expect you to answer. What do you want? I asked flatly, not in the mood for games. He let out a shaky breath. Look, I know what happened between Chloe and me was wrong. I know I made a mistake, but please, you have to understand, I never meant for it to get this far. I almost laughed at the irony. You never meant for it to get this far? You slept with my wife. Mark, you crossed every line. I know, he said quickly, his voice cracking. I know, and I'm sorry. But what's happening to me now, it's ruining my life. I've lost everything. My job, my reputation. I can't recover from this. That's the point, I said, my tone cold. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, his voice came back, quieter. Did you do this? Did you send those videos, the messages? I didn't answer right away. Let him stew in it for a moment. Finally, I said, what do you think, Mark? He let out a choked laugh, almost hysterical. Of course it was you. Who else would have the motivation? God, Oliver, I'm begging you. You've already ruined my life. What more do you want from me? I leaned back in my chair, feeling the power shift completely in my favor. I want you to disappear, Mark. I want you out of this town, out of our lives, and out of Chloe's life for good. You've destroyed enough. If I ever hear about you coming near her again, or trying to rebuild your reputation here, I'll release the rest of the footage. All of it. There was silence. Then, he whispered, you've already destroyed me. Why would you do more? Because, I said slowly, this isn't just about you. It's about what you and Chloe did to me. And I want to make sure you both feel the consequences for as long as possible. Mark didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear him breathing, shaky and uneven. Finally, he muttered, fine. You win, Oliver. You win. I hung up, a cold smile spreading across my face. Mark was done, and soon, Chloe would be too. As Mark faded from the picture, Chloe's world grew smaller. She became more withdrawn, no longer bothering to keep up the pretense of normalcy. The guilt and the shame had consumed her, leaving her a hollow shell of the woman she once was. I could see it in every movement she made, every hesitant glance in my direction. She knew that I wasn't going to forgive her, and that realization had broken something inside her. Weeks passed, and our home turned into a cold, silent battlefield. We rarely spoke. When we did, it was only about the bare necessities, bills, groceries, the logistics of our shared life. There was no affection, no warmth, just the oppressive weight of everything left unsaid. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I watched her closely during those weeks, observing as the distance between us grew wider. She stopped going out with friends and stopped attending events. She barely left the house unless it was for work. I knew the isolation was eating away at her. She had no one to turn to. The affair had cost her Mark, and she was too ashamed to confide in anyone else. Even her closest friends sensed that something was wrong, but Chloe deflected their concern, unwilling to let them see the mess she had made of her life. One evening, as I sat in the living room, Chloe came in and sat down across from me. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, a look I had grown used to by now. "I think I should move out," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden suggestion. "Move out? Why?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. I can't keep living like this, Oliver. It's unbearable. The silence, the tension. I feel like I'm suffocating in this house." I considered her words, watching the way her hands trembled. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. She was crumbling, and now she wanted an escape. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. "You think moving out will make things easier for you?" I asked, my tone cold. She flinched at my words but nodded. "I don't know. I just can't do this anymore. I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have. Maybe some space would help." I stood up, crossing the room and standing over her. "You don't get to decide when this ends, Chloe. You don't get to walk away from this mess like it's all in the past. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Tears welled up in her eyes. And she looked up at me, pleading. "Please, Oliver, I'm trying. I know I can never make it right, but I don't know what else to do. I'm lost." I stared down at her, the woman who had betrayed me so completely, and felt nothing but satisfaction at her misery. "You're not going anywhere," I said firmly. "You're going to stay right here and live with what you've done. You wanted to be with Mark, and now he's gone. You have nothing left, Chloe. No escape, no one to run to." She broke down into sobs, covering her face with her hands. I turned and left the room, leaving her there to cry alone. Every tear she shed only deepened my sense of victory. This was the fate she had chosen when she decided to betray me. Chloe's isolation was complete. She no longer spoke to her friends, and the few times I heard her on the phone, the conversations were short and strained. Even her family seemed to sense that something was deeply wrong, though they didn't know the full extent of it. And I made sure not to interfere. I let her cut herself off from everyone she once relied on, watching as her world shrank to the size of our house, and even that felt too big for her now. One morning, I came downstairs to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Oliver," she said, her voice small and broken. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." I poured myself a cup of coffee, ignoring the weight in her voice. "Do what?" This life. This silence. I'm trapped in it, and I can't take it anymore. I feel like I'm losing my mind." I took a sip of my coffee, deliberately slow, savoring the control I still held over the situation. "What did you expect, Chloe? That things would just go back to the way they were? That you could cheat, lie, and destroy everything, and then we'd just move on?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, I didn't think it would be like this. I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm so sorry." Her words were hollow to me now. I had heard her apologies too many times, and they meant nothing. But seeing her like this, broken and desperate, was exactly what I had wanted from the beginning. She had hit rock bottom, and there was nowhere left for her to go. "I don't care about your apologies anymore," I said flatly. "I don't care about what you feel. You did this to yourself, Chloe. You made the choices that led us here. She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking with the weight of it all. I watched her for a moment, letting her drown in her guilt, and then I stood up, leaving her there once again. I didn't need to do anything else. The consequences of her actions were doing all the work for me. But later that evening, something changed. I was in my study, reviewing some documents for work, when I heard a sound. A soft thud, followed by the faint sound of something hitting the floor. My heart raced for a moment, and I stood up, making my way down the hall toward the bedroom. When I pushed open the door, I found Chloe collapsed on the floor, her phone lying next to her, her face pale and clammy. "Chloe," I shouted, rushing to her side. Her breathing was shallow, and I saw an empty bottle of pills on the nightstand, its cap lying on the floor. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. I had wanted her to suffer, but not like this. Not to the point where she would take her own life. This wasn't part of the plan. I hadn't wanted her dead, just broken. As the operator answered and I stammered out what had happened, I knelt next to Chloe, trying to keep her conscious. "Stay with me," I muttered, my voice cracking. "Don't you dare give up now? You don't get to leave me like this." The ambulance arrived within minutes, and they rushed her to the hospital. I followed close behind, my mind racing with everything that had happened, every cruel word I had thrown at her. The control I had relished so much was slipping through my fingers, and now, I wasn't sure if I even wanted it anymore. When they wheeled her into the emergency room, I stood in the waiting area, numb. For the first time since the affair had come to light, I wasn't sure where we were headed. The fluorescent lights of the hospital cast a cold, sterile glow over everything. I sat in the waiting room, my mind spinning as the events of the evening replayed in my head. I had always been in control, always the one pulling the strings. But now, with Chloe lying in a hospital bed after attempting to take her own life, the control I had savored so much was slipping away. Hours passed, though they felt like an eternity. Nurses came and went, but no one had any updates. The uncertainty gnawed at me, stirring feelings I hadn't anticipated. I had wanted her to suffer, but not like this. I had never imagined she would try to escape by ending her life. Finally, a doctor approached. He was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes. The kind of expression that told me he'd seen too much. "Are you here for Chloe Duncan?" I stood up quickly, my heart pounding. "Yes, I'm her husband." The doctor nodded, folding his arms. "She's stable for now. We've pumped her stomach and administered the necessary treatments to counteract the overdose." "She was lucky. You got her here in time." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a sickening guilt. I had driven her to this. Every cruel word, every cold glance, every calculated step in my plan to make her pay had led her here. I had wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, but I hadn't expected this outcome. "Can I see her?" I asked, my voice unsteady. The doctor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "She's still weak, but you can go in. Just try to keep things calm. She's been through a lot." I followed him down the long hallway, my steps heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. When we reached her room, the doctor gave me a brief nod and left me alone at the door. Inside, Chloe was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale against the white sheets. Her eyes were half open, glassy with exhaustion, but when she saw me, she blinked and shifted slightly, as if she wasn't sure what to expect. I stepped closer, standing by the foot of the bed, unsure of what to say. I had spent weeks plotting her downfall, relishing her misery, but now that she was here, fragile and broken, the victory felt hollow. "You're awake," I said quietly, breaking the silence. She nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't apologize for this. You shouldn't have." My words trailed off as I struggled to find the right thing to say. How could I even begin to explain what I was feeling? Chloe closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. I just couldn't take it anymore. The guilt, the shame, the silence between us. It was too much. I stood there, staring at her as the reality of the situation sank in. I had wanted her to suffer, but I had never considered what that suffering might actually look like. I had never thought it would push her to the brink of death. "I didn't want this," I said finally, my voice low. "I didn't want you to do this." She opened her eyes again, her gaze soft and filled with sorrow. "What did you want, Oliver?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unavoidable. I didn't have an answer. I had thought I wanted revenge, to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. But now, standing in this sterile room with her life hanging by a thread, I wasn't so sure. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely audible. For the first time in what felt like months, we were both quiet. Not the tense, angry silence that had filled our home, but something different, a silence born of exhaustion and regret. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't know what came next. The days that followed Chloe's hospital stay were a blur. She was discharged after a few days of monitoring. But she wasn't the same. Neither of us were. Something had fundamentally shifted between us, though I couldn't quite put it into words. At home, she moved like a shadow, speaking only when necessary, avoiding my gaze. I was no longer tormenting her, I couldn't bring myself to. Seeing her in that hospital bed, pale and fragile, had shaken something loose in me. The satisfaction I had felt in her misery had been replaced by something else, something darker. I spent hours replaying everything in my mind. My plan, my revenge, all the ways I had manipulated her emotions to exact my own brand of justice. And while I had succeeded in making her feel the weight of her betrayal, I had also pushed her to a place I hadn't intended. I had lost control of my own vengeance. Late one night, I found myself in my study, staring blankly at the wall, the events of the past weeks weighing heavily on my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt lost. I had thought revenge would make me feel better and would give me some sense of closure. But all it had done was deepen the wounds, hers and mine. Instead of healing, I had poured salt into every cut, and now the pain was unbearable. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos. There she was, Chloe, smiling in happier times. Her face was full of life, her eyes bright. I remembered the love we had once shared, the warmth that had once filled our home. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. How had we gotten here? I wasn't blameless, I realized. Yes, she had betrayed me. But I had chosen the path of revenge, feeding the cycle of destruction. And now, standing on the other side of that revenge, I was left with the wreckage of our marriage, of our lives. The guilt crept up on me slowly, at first just a nagging feeling at the back of my mind. But as the days passed, it grew stronger, until it became a constant presence. I had done this. I had driven her to the brink. I had let my anger, my need for control, consume me. One night, I found myself standing outside Chloe's bedroom. We hadn't shared a bed since the affair, each of us retreating to separate corners of the house. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I didn't know what I would say, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding this. I knocked softly, and after a long pause, I heard her voice from the other side. "Come in." When I opened the door, Chloe was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "We need to talk." She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. I could see the weariness in her, the exhaustion from everything we had been through. But there was also something else, a flicker of hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice hesitant. "About everything. About what I did. I thought I could hurt you, make you feel what I felt. But I was wrong. I pushed you too far." Chloe didn't say anything, but her eyes softened slightly as if she were waiting for me to continue. "I wanted revenge," I admitted. "I wanted to make you pay for what you did. But now I see that I've only made things worse. For both of us." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "I hurt you, Oliver. I know I did, and I know I deserve everything you did for me. But I never wanted it to end like this." I took a deep breath, the words I had been holding back for weeks finally spilling out. "I'm sorry. For everything." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected that, neither had I. "I don't know where we go from here," I continued, "but I don't want this, whatever this is between us, to destroy us both." Chloe stared at me for a long time, as if trying to process what I had just said. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want that either." For the first time in weeks, there was a fragile sense of understanding between us. We were both broken, both lost, but maybe, just maybe, there was a chance we could start picking up the pieces. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. In the days that followed our conversation, the tension in the house began to lift ever so slightly. The air wasn't as suffocating, the silences not quite as unbearable. But forgiveness wasn't something that came easily, not for me, not for Chloe. We were two people bound by a shared history and broken by betrayal. We didn't know how to heal, only that we couldn't keep tearing each other apart. Chloe seemed fragile, like a bird nursing a broken wing. She was careful with her words, always avoiding confrontation as if afraid one wrong move would send everything crashing down again. I watched her closely, looking for signs that she was recovering from her darkest moment. But she still moved around the house like a ghost, her once vibrant spirit reduced to a whisper. One evening, about a week after I'd apologized, I came home from work to find her sitting in the living room. She had the TV on, but her eyes were glazed over, staring right through it. I hesitated in the doorway and was unsure of how to approach her. For so long, we'd been enemies, or at least, I had treated her that way. But now, standing there, I realized I didn't want to be her enemy anymore. I wanted something different, I just didn't know what that was yet. "Chloe?" I called softly. She blinked and looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Hey." I walked over and sat down across from her, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. After a long pause, I finally spoke. "How are you feeling?" The question sounded awkward, but it was the only one I could think of. She shrugged, glancing down at her hands. "Better, I guess. Physically, at least." The conversation felt stilted and unnatural, like two people trying to talk after years of silence. But I wasn't giving up, not this time. "I've been thinking a lot about us," I said, my voice tentative. "About how we got here. What we've both done." Chloe nodded slowly but didn't say anything. "I don't know if we can fix this," I admitted. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you for what you did. But I also know that what I did, the way I treated you, that wasn't right either." Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away quickly. "I never meant to hurt you, Oliver. I know that sounds like a lie, given everything, but it's true. I was lost, confused, but that doesn't excuse what I did." "I know," I said, surprising myself with the softness in my voice. "But I think, if we're ever going to move forward, we need to figure out if we can let go of all this anger. All this pain." She looked up at me then, her eyes full of vulnerability. "Do you think we can?" The question was impossible to answer. Could I ever truly forgive her? Could I let go of the bitterness that had consumed me for so long? I didn't know, but there was something in her eyes. Something fragile yet hopeful, that made me want to try. "I think we can try," I said quietly. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation or redemption. But it was a step, a small, uncertain step towards something different. Something better. Our truce was tentative and fragile, like a bridge built over a canyon that could collapse at any moment. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Chloe and I were both willing to try. We tiptoed around each other, cautious with our words and actions. Each of us afraid to break the delicate peace we had found. She started spending more time in the common areas of the house, the living room, the kitchen, instead of hiding away in her bedroom or retreating into silence. I found myself noticing small things about her again, things I had forgotten in the haze of anger and betrayal. The way she used to hum softly while making coffee, the way her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edges of her book when she read. These details reminded me of who she was before all of this, before the affair. Before the lies. One evening, I found her in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. It was such a normal, domestic scene that it felt almost surreal. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment before I finally spoke. "Need any help?" She glanced over her shoulder, surprised by the offer, but nodded. "Sure, you can cut these," she said, handing me a knife and a few more vegetables. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the rhythm of chopping filling the space between us. It wasn't awkward, though. For once, the quiet felt natural. Comfortable, even. After a while, Chloe broke the silence. "Do you ever think about what things would be like if none of this had happened?" I paused, the knife halfway through a carrot, and looked over at her. She wasn't meeting my eyes, focused instead on the onions in front of her, but I could hear the weight in her voice. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I don't think it helps to dwell on it." She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping slightly. I miss how we used to be. Before everything got so complicated." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I felt it too. The loss of what we once had, the simplicity of it. But I couldn't lie to myself. Things had changed, and there was no going back to who we were before. "I miss it too," I said quietly, surprising myself with the admission. But we can't undo what's been done, Chloe. All we can do is figure out what comes next. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and hope. Do you think we'll ever get back to something good? I thought about that for a moment, the weight of the question settling over me. Could we ever rebuild what had been broken? Could we find something resembling happiness after everything we had been through? I don't know, I said honestly. But I think we can find something new. It won't be the same as before, but maybe it can be better in its own way. Chloe smiled softly, a flicker of warmth returning to her expression. I'd like that, she whispered. The moment felt fragile, like we were both standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of revenge or anger hanging over us. There was something else, something lighter. As we finished making dinner together, I realized that this was the first time we had worked side by side, as a team, in months. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something, even if it was different than what we had before. Even as Chloe and I tried to rebuild the fragile remnants of our marriage, one part of my plan remained unfinished. Jack Benson, the man who had torn my life apart, was still out there, his reputation intact, untouched by the destruction he had caused. I had promised myself I would make him pay, and I wasn't about to let that promise go. In the weeks since Chloe's overdose, I had kept tabs on Jack. He was still teaching, still performing, and still enjoying the adoration of his students and peers. It made me sick to think of him living his life without consequence, while Chloe and I were left to pick up the pieces of ours. My anger, though dampened by guilt and regret over what had happened with Chloe, still simmered just beneath the surface. I had the recordings. I had the evidence. And now, it was time to use them. One evening, after Chloe had gone to bed, I sat in my study with my laptop open in front of me. The folder containing the recordings of Chloe and Jack stared back at me, a silent reminder of everything I had uncovered. My hand hovered over the mouse, my heart pounding in my chest. I had waited for this moment, savored the thought of Jack's downfall, but now that it was here, I hesitated. I thought about Chloe, about how fragile she had become since everything had come crashing down. We were slowly rebuilding, but I knew that if I went through with this, it would drag us both back into the chaos. Could I really put her through more? But then I thought about Jack, about how he had taken advantage of her vulnerability, about how he had laughed in my face when I had confronted him at his studio. He didn't deserve to walk away from this unscathed. He deserved to lose everything, just as I had. With a deep breath, I clicked on the file, the sound of their voices filling the room. I couldn't bring myself to listen to the whole thing again, but I didn't need to. I knew what was there, and I knew how damning it would be. I began drafting the email. I was careful and precise, making sure there was no way this could be traced back to me. I attached the recordings and addressed the message to the board of directors at the music conservatory where Jack taught, as well as a few key members of the local music community. I didn't include a note. I didn't need to. The recordings would speak for themselves. Before I hit send, I paused one last time, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was it, the moment of no return. Once I sent this, there would be no undoing it. But Jack Benson needed to pay. With a final, decisive click, I sent the email. The fallout was swift. Within days, rumors began to circulate in the local music community. Whispers of Jack Benson's inappropriate relationships with students, of his affairs, of the recordings that had surfaced. It didn't take long for the story to spread, and soon enough, it hit the local news. The conservatory where he worked released a statement announcing that they had launched an internal investigation and that Jack had been placed on indefinite leave. Students began coming forward, sharing stories of Jack's inappropriate behavior, of how he had crossed lines with them, too. What had started as a whisper quickly grew into a full-blown scandal. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling a mix of satisfaction and unease. I had wanted this, had dreamed of it, but now that it was happening, it didn't feel as triumphant as I had imagined. Jack's career was crumbling, his reputation destroyed, but the victory felt hollow. The rage that had driven me for so long wasn't as satisfying now that it was coming to fruition. Chloe, on the other hand, had no idea what I had done. I hadn't told her about the recordings, hadn't mentioned Jack's downfall. She was still healing, still fragile, and I didn't want to drag her back into that darkness. But as the scandal grew, it became harder to hide. One afternoon, while we were sitting together in the living room, Chloe's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as she read the message. I knew, even before she said anything, what it was about. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. He's been suspended from the conservatory. There's a scandal, someone leaked recordings of him with students. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you know about this?" I swallowed hard, the weight of the secret I had been keeping pressing down on me. I had a choice to make. I could lie, pretend I had nothing to do with it, or I could tell her the truth. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew I couldn't lie to her anymore. I'm the one who sent the recordings," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Chloe stared at me, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing, and the silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "Why would you do that?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Because he needed to pay for what he did. To you. To us. He tore our lives apart, Chloe, and he didn't deserve to get away with it." Tears filled her eyes, and she wiped them away angrily. "I know he hurt us, Oliver. But this is too much. You've ruined his life." I couldn't argue with her. I had ruined Jack's life, and I had done it deliberately. But I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Not after everything he had done. "He deserved it," I said quietly, though the conviction in my voice faltered. Chloe shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can do this, Oliver. I don't know if I can keep living like this, with all this anger and revenge hanging over us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had thought that bringing Jack down would bring us closer together, would help us heal. But now, seeing the pain in her eyes, I realized that I had only driven us further apart. I thought it would make things better," I said, my voice breaking. "I thought it would give us some kind of closure." Chloe stood up, her hands trembling. "There is no closure in revenge, Oliver. It just keeps the wounds open." She turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. I had gotten what I wanted. Jack Benson was ruined. But at what cost? As I sat there, staring at the empty space where Chloe had just been, I realized that maybe she was right. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer. Maybe all I had done was dig the wounds deeper. And now, I wasn't sure if they would ever heal. The days following my confession were marked by a chilling silence. Chloe barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were brief, cold, and distant. I had never seen her like this, not even during the darkest moments of our marriage. The fragile peace we had begun to build was shattered, and I knew I was the one responsible for the wreckage. Jack Benson was finished. The news articles continued to roll in, each one more damning than the last. More women came forward, accusing him of inappropriate conduct, and his name became synonymous with disgrace in the music community. His career was over, his legacy destroyed, and I had done it. I should have felt satisfied, but instead, I felt hollow. Chloe's words haunted me. There is no closure in revenge. Maybe she was right. My obsession with making Jack pay had consumed me for so long that I hadn't realized what it was costing me: my marriage, my sanity, my future. Chloe had become collateral damage in a war one had waged for my pride, and now I was losing her. One night, I came home late from work. The house was quiet and dark, save for a single light in the living room. Chloe was sitting on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the floor. Her presence took me by surprise. We had barely seen each other these past few days. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should approach or leave her alone. "Chloe," I said softly, stepping toward her. She didn't look up, but I could see her shoulders tense. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice so low I could barely hear her. "I don't know how to be around you anymore, Oliver." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest, and I stood frozen, unsure how to respond. "I thought we could fix this," she continued, her voice trembling. "I thought we could find a way back to each other, but after what you did, I don't know if we can." I took a step closer, my heart racing. "Chloe, I did it for us. I thought if I made Jack pay, we could move on. I thought it would help us heal." She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain. "You didn't do it for us, Oliver. You did it for yourself. You wanted revenge, and now that you have it, look at what's left. You got what you wanted. But at what cost?" I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, but the words died on my tongue. She was right. I had been so consumed by my need for revenge that I hadn't considered the damage I was doing to her, to us. I'm sorry, I whispered, the weight of the apology pressing down on me. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I can see now that I wasn't. Chloe wiped at her eyes, her expression softening, but only slightly. I don't know if sorry is enough anymore. Oliver. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel her slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. We had been through so much and survived so many storms, but this one felt different. This time, I wasn't sure if we could weather it. I don't want to lose you, I said, my voice barely audible. Please, Chloe, I'll do anything to fix this. Just tell me what to do. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine for something, a promise, an answer. Maybe even hope, but whatever she was looking for, I wasn't sure I could give it to her. I don't know if I can stay, she said, her voice breaking. Not like this, not after everything. And with those words, the last thread holding us together snapped. I felt it in my chest, a sharp, searing pain that left me breathless. She stood up, avoiding my gaze, and walked toward the bedroom without another word. I was left standing in the dark, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. Chloe was right. I had won the battle. But I was losing the war. And this time, I wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Chloe was gone, her suitcase missing from the closet, her car absent from the driveway. A note was left on the kitchen table, written in her delicate handwriting, the words heavy with finality. Oliver, I need time. I need space. I don't know if I can stay here and pretend that everything can be fixed. I love you, but I don't know if love is enough anymore. I'll be staying with my sister for a while. Please don't try to contact me. Chloe. I read the note over and over again, each time feeling the hole in my chest grow wider. She had left. I had driven her away. I sat at the kitchen table, the silence around me deafening, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. I had been so focused on destroying Jack Benson that I hadn't seen what I was doing to Chloe, to us. Now, she was gone, and I was left to face the consequences of my own actions. Days passed, but they all blurred together. Work became a distraction, a way to keep me from thinking about the empty house, the unanswered phone calls, and the hollow ache in my chest. I didn't hear from Chloe, and part of me knew that I might never hear from her again. One evening, about a week after she left, I received a call from an unknown number. For a moment, I hoped it was Chloe, but when I answered, a familiar voice greeted me on the other end. Oliver, came the cold, hard voice of Jack Benson. My stomach dropped. Jack? You think you've won, don't you? He sneered, his voice laced with venom. You think ruining my career, my reputation, will make everything better for you. But let me tell you something, Oliver, you're a fool. I clenched the phone tighter, my pulse quickening. You destroyed my life, Jack. You took everything from me. Don't you dare act like you're the victim here? He let out a bitter laugh. Destroyed your life? You did that all by yourself. Your obsession with revenge. It's what's ruined you. Not me. You're pathetic. Anger flared in my chest, but beneath it, I felt a growing sense of despair. Jack was right. My obsession with taking him down had consumed me, and now I had nothing to show for it. Chloe was gone, our marriage in ruins, and the hollow victory of Jack's downfall meant nothing. What do you want, Jack? I asked through gritted teeth. I just wanted to hear you say it, he replied smugly. That you know, deep down, you've lost. You'll never have Chloe back. She'll never forgive you. His words cut deep, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing my pain. I don't need to say anything to you, Jack. You're finished. Enjoy the rest of your miserable life. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling with rage. Jack Benson might have been right about one thing. I had lost more than I had bargained for in my pursuit of revenge. But I wasn't about to let him have the last word. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with them. As I sat in the empty house, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, I realized that maybe, in the end, there were no winners in this game. Chloe was gone, Jack's career was destroyed, and I was left with nothing but regret. But there was one thing I knew for certain, revenge had cost me everything. And I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to rebuild what had been broken. It's been 6 months since Chloe left. 6 months since the day I woke up to an empty house, her note on the kitchen table like a final nail in the coffin of our marriage. At first, I thought it was temporary. I convinced myself she just needed time, that eventually, she'd come back. But as the days stretched into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, I realized that she wasn't coming back. Not this time. I think about her every day. Every night, I fall asleep in our bed, on my side, where the faint scent of her perfume still lingers on the pillow. The house is cold without her, an echo of everything we once had. I don't know where things went wrong. Maybe it was the affair. Maybe it was my obsession with revenge, maybe it was both. But the truth is, by the time I realized how far I had fallen, it was too late to save anything. Jack Benson, the man I had destroyed, is nothing but a distant memory now. The music conservatory cut all ties with him, the scandal too big for them to handle quietly. He was blacklisted from the local music community, and his name has become synonymous with disgrace. I've heard rumors that he moved out of town, but I don't really care anymore. Ruining him didn't give me the closure I thought it would. In fact, it did the opposite. It left me empty. Chloe's sister, Megan, called me once, about 3 months after Chloe left. She didn't say much, just that Chloe was safe, that she was staying with her, and that she needed more time. I didn't push for details. I didn't ask to speak to Chloe. What could I say? That I was sorry? That I wanted to fix things? I had realized too late how much I loved her and how little revenge meant in the grand scheme of things. Instead, I just thanked Megan and hung up the phone. I haven't heard from them since. In the quiet of the house, I've had a lot of time to think. To reflect on the choices I made, and where they led me. I thought that by making Jack suffer, I would find some kind of justice, that it would right the wrongs he had done to me, to my marriage. But all it did was turn me into someone I barely recognize. Someone who put pride and vengeance above the person he loved the most. Chloe was right. There is no closure in revenge. It's a hard lesson to learn, especially when you're left sitting in the ruins of your life, with no one to blame but yourself. I've thought about reaching out to Chloe, about trying to rebuild what we lost, but deep down, I know that we're too far gone. The damage I caused can't be undone, and I don't know if either of us will ever be able to move past it. I took something from her when I went after Jack, not just her trust, but her sense of peace. I dragged her through the mud of my anger and bitterness. And now, we're both covered in it. I'm not sure where I go from here. Some days, I think about selling the house, leaving town, and starting over somewhere far away. Other days, I wonder if there's a way to stay, to try and make amends, even if Chloe never comes back. I'm still in therapy, still trying to piece together the fragments of who I used to be, but it's a slow process. There are days when I feel like I'm making progress, and others where the weight of everything I've lost feels unbearable. But if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that revenge isn't worth the price it demands. It promises satisfaction, justice, and closure, but all it delivers is emptiness. I got what I wanted. Jack Benson is ruined. But in the process, I ruined myself, too. There's a small part of me that still holds on to hope. Hope that maybe, one day, Chloe will come back. That we'll sit down together, talk about everything, and find a way to move forward. But I know that's wishful thinking. Even if we did manage to rebuild, it would never be the same. We're different people now, shaped by the choices we made and the pain we caused each other. As I sit here, alone in this house that used to be full of life and love, I think about what Chloe said the night she left: there is no closure in revenge. It just keeps the wounds open. She was right. The wounds are still open. And I'm not sure they'll ever heal. Maybe that's the final lesson in all of this. That some scars are meant to stay with you. To remind you of the cost of your actions. And maybe, just maybe, those scars are the only real closure I'll ever get. As I finish my coffee, the silence of the empty house settles around me. There's no going back, only forward. And though I don't know what the future holds, I know one thing for sure: I'm done with revenge. It's time to let go.